coming from, I actually just attended a UTD graduation earlier this afternoon. It was very special. So on that note, I'll share a story about a Jewish college student who comes home after his first semester at college, and his European Zadie says to him, "Oh, Jack, so tell me, I heard these colleges are so modern. They teach you all these advanced and complex things. So tell me, what did they teach you there?" So he says, "Oh, Zadie, you ever heard of Einstein?" It's like, "No, no idea what you're talking about." He's like, "Well, see, there was this guy named Einstein. He came up with theory of relativity that changed the world. And I'll try to explain it to you. It goes something like this. I was trying to think how to explain this to Zadie, right? So it's like, well, if you take your hand and hold it over a fire, 1 minute feels like an hour. But if you have your grandchild on your lap for an hour, 1 hour feels like a minute. That's what they taught me about the theory of relativity. And his grandfather looks at him and says, "So tell me, from this, your Einstein makes a living? This is what they're teaching you?" Anyway, our introduction to what we've been discussing in the last few chapters is we're talking about this deep, deep love that we all have inside of us that is usually dormant. We're not typically aware of it, but it's that love that wakes up when we feel like our Jewishness is threatened, like our connection is threatened. And we started a discussion in basically along the lines of, if I have this very, very powerful love inside me, how do I get it to wake up more often? Like, why does it only wake up in like severe situations? Why can't I utilize this powerful love to help me do the right thing all the time? So the Tanya is beginning a long discussion to help us understand the mindset that's required to activate this love. And we mentioned last time that the first two commandments, "I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have any other God," really captures and includes all of Judaism. All of Judaism, all the commandments are really, either affirming God's existence or denying God's existence. And how's that possible, right? Like, be kind to people, keep Shabbat, prayer, maybe prayer, but, keeping kosher. How's all this, affirming or denying God's existence? And so we're a little bit on a tangent now that's going to last. It started last chapter. It's going to last this chapter and the following chapter. A little bit of a philosophical discussion of, how does Judaism look at God? How do we view God's existence, God's oneness, God's relation to us? And you may not see the connection directly, but once we complete the section, we kind of go back to the beginning of the idea and say, okay, so this is how we can start perceiving life. And when we look at life through this lens, it actually will enable us to tap into this hidden love on a more regular basis. So back to our little story here, talking about theory of relativity. We can describe what we discussed last time, perhaps, as the Hasidic theory of relativity. When we say there's only one God, right? The main prayer in Judaism, Shema Yisrael, there's only one God. You can say there's only one God, there aren't two gods. Thank God most of us don't need to work too hard to accept that. You could take it a step further. You could say, we can say there is only one God, and there isn't any real power besides for God. We can't attribute power or strength to anything else except God. The most extreme version, which is what the Tanya is introducing as a new concept that is, unfamiliar to many of us, is not just there's no other God besides God, not only there's no other power besides God, but actually there is nothing else besides God. When we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," that means he is one, always one, continues to be one. His oneness hasn't changed. He's not any less alone now that there is a world and all of us exist. He is one. How do you explain that? And so some of the things we described last time, we gave an example of, daydreaming. When I create an image or a scene in my imagination, and it has a lot of details, and it has people, and it has sounds, and it has smells, and there's so much going on, but actually none of it really exists. That beautiful waterfall and the birds chirping, as soon as I stop imagining it, doesn't exist anymore. It just existed as a figment of my imagination. So too, we're saying that that's what creation is to God. It's something that God gives life to, but as soon as God is not giving it life anymore, it doesn't exist. It doesn't have its own existence outside of God. Another example that's given is a shadow. You can see a shadow. Sometimes you could see a beautiful shadow with so many details, but then the light moves or the original item moves and oh wait, where'd the shadow go? The example that Hasidic teachings give is about a stone that's flying. Can a stone fly? A stone in a natural state doesn't fly. If I throw it, if I, kind of put energy into it, so long as that energy is still continuing, the stone will continue to fly. As soon as the energy runs out, the stone will go back to its default status, which is flying on the ground. So we can understand that like an airplane too, right? Can an airplane fly? Well, so an airplane could be made to fly. None of these are perfect examples. That's why I give so many. I think everyone could connect to a different one. But the idea is that what the Tanya was telling us, that the whole world, all of existence, doesn't exist on its own. It's all something being made to exist by God, that the moment he ceases to speak it or think it or throw it or whatever, however you want to think of him vivifying it, it's gone. It's not, oh, and then all the people die. No, it just poof, it never happened. It's like when I, imagine a conversation with someone in my mind, and then I open my eyes and say, wait, so what were they thinking when they said that? They weren't thinking. They never existed. The conversation never happened. It was something that I was creating in my mind. And this is what last chapter focused on, was really the idea of the lack of existence of everything else, so to speak, outside of God. And it started this discussion, but it really left us with some questions, some big questions at the end. The main question that we all have is, okay, I understand with someone's imagination that it all doesn't exist when they stop imagining it, but those creatures in my imagined scene, they don't think they exist. And let's say if I'm imagining that I'm walking in a forest and I'm meeting all these nice, lovely people and they're all chatting with me and we're enjoying the waterfall and the smell of the flowers, that's all from my perspective, right? But it's not like these people have brains and are thinking and they're saying, oh, let's walk around in Deanie's imagination. Like they don't have their perspective. And that's different for us because our reality is that we do exist. We look around, we see a real world, we actually have ideas of things that we want to do. We can carry out our ideas. We can do what it is that we set out to do. I'm not even going to talk about it now, but next chapter talks about how not just we are our own independent beings, but we can actually decide to go completely against God and be not, there's a few stages here. There's self-awareness, like feeling that I'm a separate existence. And then there is independence, that I can decide to do whatever I want and I can deny God's existence. So in what we described before, that part didn't exist. How do you reconcile the fact that I feel like I exist, I have life, I have experiences, and yet the Tanya is telling me I don't really exist? I'm really what? Just a figment of God's imagination? And the other question that goes hand in hand with this is also, we kept saying speech. We said God created the world through speech. And this allegory of speech helps us understand how the world, just like the words that I speak, are really nothing. You know, when I come out of my room in the morning and I say good morning to my kids, the words good morning that come out of my mouth are practically nothing compared to the amount of words I speak on a daily basis. They're even more less nothing, even nothinger, compared to the potential of words that I have in my word bank and my ability to speak. And then if I want to compare it to my thought process and all the thoughts that go on in my mind, the two words good morning are like, you can't even compare them to that. And then if I want to think of my identity and myself and my whole being, you know, my whole being relative to the two words that I said, good morning, how much of me does that express? Nothing. It's like it's not even a drop in the bucket. So similarly, we were saying God created the world through speech. The whole world is to God kind of like my words, good morning, are to me. But that being said, you also see in speech that if I say something, let's say, and you record the words that I said, I'm just going to finish the thought, Lorraine, and then I'll take your question. If I say something and you record my words, can you play back the words? Of course you can. Can you use AI to change the words around and like give it its own identity? I don't have control over it anymore. It left my mouth and it went out, right? We see that also in the negative. If I said something hurtful to someone, I can't unsay it. I said it. So as much as we say that words are just an expression of me, they're an expression of me that then becomes separate from me. So if we follow that allegory, we could say, all right, we accept that the world is God's speech, but God spoke it into existence, and now we exist. We're like these independent beings that we can, I don't know, I guess use AI to change things up and do whatever we want. God kind of has no more control over us because he spoke us into existence and he's not here anymore. So we need to understand, we need to better understand what is this allegory of speech and to just get a better and clearer understanding of what the Tanya is explaining to us, you know, do we exist? How do we exist? And, you know, how do all these pieces tie together? Yes, Lorraine.
So I just don't understand the one thought that God creating a world is the same as you saying good morning. Like, there's a lot happening in the words of those 7 days and all that happened in those 7 days with those words versus good morning, like a little phrase to greet your children.
Right.
I don't understand the comparison of those two because one seems magnanimous and one seems, kind of trite. I don't think that God created our world. I'm just saying, I don't think that we're so trite. I think that God wanted this world or wouldn't have created it. God wanted to be recognized and adored or wouldn't have needed us to do that. And so I'm not following that comparison.
So I'm happy you asked that because that kind of leads us straight into this chapter. We're trying to
Okay.
understand this allegory of speech. Okay, the Torah tells us God created the world through speech. He said, let there be light, let there be this, let there be that. So everything in the world was created through God's speech. Did God speak it? Like God has vocal cords? Were there like sound waves going around? And Kabbalah teaches us that no, like it wasn't actual speech the way we understand speech. The reason the Torah uses a terminology speech is trying to teach us something about the relation of the world to God. What is speech? Speech is an expression for people. Speech is an expression of me. It's a limited expression of me, but it's an expression of me. It can't be compared to who I am and my full identity, but it's a form of expression. So too, just like we understand speech in ourselves, when the Torah tells us God spoke things into existence, so we understand that the world A is an expression of God, as much as our words are an expression of us and our thoughts and our personality. At the same time, just like our speech is a very limited expression of us compared to everything else that we are and we think and we know, so too, relative to God, I mean, the world, yes, the world is huge and complex and has so many details. God is infinite, you know? Of course, his speech is going to be infinitely more complex and beautiful than the words that I say. But compared to him, the theory of relativity here, that God's speech to him is similar to the way my speech is to me. Compared to the infinite God, this world is just a few words. Compared to me, my words are just, a small expression of me. But it is still not a perfect parable. Like we said, speech is an expression, but it's an expression that becomes separate. It's an expression that takes on its own identity. So how do we reconcile that part? We'll read that inside, but in short, what the Tanya is going to say is that the speech allegory isn't perfect, and there are parts of speech that we can't draw a parallel to. But let's look at it inside before we go on to explain. Okay, beginning of chapter 21. The nature of the divine order is not like that of a human being, a creature of flesh and blood. Therefore, human terms cannot adequately describe divine qualities. Thus, in our case, when man says something, the breath of the spoken word may be sensed and is perceived as an independent entity separate from its source, namely the 10 intellectual and emotional faculties of the soul itself. Like we said, when I say something, my words have power on their own. My words can be recorded and played back. Like there's a certain element of the words, once they leave my mouth, they're no longer inside me, right? But the speech of God is not, God forbid, separate from his divine self, because nothing is outside of him, and there's no place devoid of him. So God's speech is kind of like speech in that it reveals and it expresses him, but it's unlike human speech in that it's not outside of him. So it's almost like God's speech to God is like thoughts. That's why the example of imagining a scene in my mind is a pretty good comparison, because when I imagine something in my mind, it's inside of me. If we say there's nothing outside of God, so even God's speech, it's an expression of him, but it's still inside him. It has nowhere to go outside of God. So then why does the Torah say God spoke things into existence? It could have said he thought things into existence. Well, we all know that speech has something unique over thought. Speech actually expresses our thoughts to the outside world, right? We all know, I think we discussed this last time, that, if we had a running ticker on our forehead that was just saying everything that we were thinking all the time, I think we'd all be covering our faces all the time. That would not be a great way to live and get along with people. Thankfully, most of us have some kind of filter that there's what we think and then what we choose to say so that it's heard on the outside. So we're saying that speech has two qualities. A, speech is an expression of self. And B, speech is a revealing expression, meaning it allows those on the outside, so to speak, to know what I'm thinking or what I want to express to them. That's why the Torah uses the term speech, because when God spoke things into existence, it allows us created beings I see the world. I see the trees. I see the mountains. I see the people. I can't say it's God's thoughts, because God's thoughts would be like thoughts inside his head. It's something that others wouldn't be able to see. So the reason the Torah uses the term speech is to show that it's an expression of God, and it's a revealing expression of God that kind of reveals it to the creations. But the part of speech that we have, that the speech actually becomes separate from us, that doesn't apply to God's speech, because God's speech is forever part of him. Let's read it inside before we analyze it further. Therefore, right here. last paragraph here. Therefore, his speech is not like our speech, God forbid, just as obviously his thoughts are not like our thoughts, as it is stated, for my thoughts are not like your thoughts, and it is also written, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Similarly, God's speech is different from human speech. So to review what we said, I'm going to go to the second paragraph here. In explanation, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, states that speech is distinguished by two characteristics. A, it reveals that which was previously hidden in the speaker's thoughts. And B, the speech becomes separated from its source. Only A exists in God. When we say God's speech, it's because we're saying it's a revelation of God's thoughts. In that way, the world is God's speech. But in the way that our speech becomes separate from us, that's not true of God. God's speech never becomes separate from him. Meaning that even though God spoke this world into existence, it remains an expression of God, but it's not an expression that is separate of God. It's an expression that still is inside of him and included in him. God's speech is called speech only in order to illustrate that quality of revelation that it possesses. Just as man's speech reveals to his audience what was hidden and concealed in his thoughts, so too the emergence of light and life force of the Ein Sof from concealment before creation into revelation through the acts of creation for the purpose of creating and animating the world is called speech. In this case, the audience is the created being from its own perspective, at least. Okay. If you already lost me, that's okay. But let's try to summarize this in simple human terms, even though we're talking about very deep philosophical ideas. Practically speaking, there's two perspectives. There's God's perspective and there's our perspective. It seems we go through life, we feel our perspective. Our perspective is reality. I see a world, I see my house, I see my family, I pay my real mortgage, I work my real job, I go shopping in real stores, and then I learn about this idea that there's a God, and there's God's perspective. It seems what the Tanya is trying to do is to open our eyes to God's perspective. Yes, our perspective will exist. God created us and our perspective. But if we want to understand the world from God's perspective, then we need to understand that the truth is that actually everything that exists is godliness. We are godliness as well, as is the world around us. And it's only through God's intent that he allows us to feel like we exist as separate beings. Meaning when I walk around, I know we started speaking about this last time, when I walk around outside and I see nature and I see stuff and I see people and I see creation, from my perspective, it just looks like a world. From God's perspective, it's like he's imagining a scene in his head. It's all part of God. It's all inside of God. The genius here is that God was able to create a world that to the creations appears to be completely independent of him. An example I heard, some of you guys may remember this. I only know of like one or two stores like this from when I was little. They used to make the stores many years ago. If you went to a clothing store, you'd go into the store, there were racks of clothes all over, and in the middle, it looks like there was this big like mirror, like a big square, like cubed mirror in the middle of the store. So to the shopper, it seemed like this store has so many mirrors for me to, try on my clothes. But really, it was a little room, a little office in the center of the store where the store manager would sit. And it was a one-way mirror, meaning the walls of the manager's office, the manager could see straight out. From the manager's perspective, there was no mirror. It was just windows. They looked outside their office. They could see all the people shopping. From the people's perspective, people only saw mirrors. So people would come and they would, stand and look at themselves in the mirror. Meanwhile, the store manager was just sitting inside in looking at all the people. Obviously, the purpose was for the manager to be able to keep an eye on what's going on in the store without people feeling like they're being, steered down. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Those kind of stores? And I don't think they exist anymore. Um, the idea is that a shopper going to the store, the shopper's experience is I'm in a beautiful store full of clothes and full of mirrors. From the manager's perspective, you're in my store and I've got all glass windows around me and I'm actually sitting here and watching everything you're doing. It's not a perfect example because we're not saying that God is sitting on the outside and, kind of watching us, but it helps us understand that there's two different perspectives here. From God's perspective, we may all be in his imagination. Not in his imagination quite, but we're just him. We're just inside of him. We're part of him. From our perspective, we're separate, independent beings. How is it then that I can truly choose things and decide things and do whatever I want and even choose to go against him? That's not because I'm separate from him. It's because that's something that he built into the mechanism of creation. God created a concept of free choice. It's like, imagine if I go back to this thing where I'm imagining a scene in my mind and I imagine all of these people. I don't have the capacity to do this, but imagine now I was able to give each of these fictional characters the ability to choose and to do whatever they want. I know we spoke about this last time we spoke about this. I showed a little video clip of a video game. Someone's designing a video game, and anyone who's into programming knows this, right? You create code and you put these little characters into your video game, and then you create like rules of what the characters can do. And typically the characters can only, they can move right or left, they can go up and down, whatever you put into the code. Now imagine that these little characters had little brains inside them. Maybe with AI, we can kind of almost like get to that place where these characters now say, wait a second, why am I stuck here inside this? Why is she only letting me go right, left, up, and down? I am going to jump in circles. Now, a typical programmer doesn't have the capacity to give the characters their own desire. But God does. The creator of all of creation does. And part of his program, he created that each of us has free choice. Not free choice because I'm so powerful I can choose to go against God, but actually, it's just a sign that his system's working. He created the ability for someone to say, I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in God. That's only possible because he put it into the system. Now, why would he put in the ability for people to deny his existence, to become, to feel like separate entities? Well, because otherwise there would be no choice, right? If we were just going to do whatever he programmed us to do, and we didn't have the ability to choose to connect to him and to want to connect to him, if we didn't have the option to do the opposite of his will, then doing his will would be a no-brainer. Only because he created those choices and he gave us the ability to choose. So it's really a paradox, because on one hand, we say everything is really God. From God's perspective, we basically don't exist. We're just part of him. From our perspective, we do exist. So do we exist or do we not exist? That is a paradox that God created. He created us as beings that from one side of the glass, we're just an expression of him. From the other side of the glass, actually, we feel like independent beings and we could choose whatever we want because he gave us that ability. Yes, Sarah.
Okay, so I'm struggling with something here. There's a psychological disorder where basically somebody is thinking that a part of them is sort of removed from them. So for example, I think that my arm is not really attached to me or a part of me. It's basically a dissociative disorder. Okay. I'm
Okay.
sort of connecting it in that perspective. And here's why I'm thinking this way. If it's sort of separated, us as human beings, it almost makes me feel worse that when I say something, that yes, that was the part of me, sort of separated part of me, if you will, that yeah, I have the ability, as you gave the possibility, that I could say, yeah, I'm an atheist. Yeah, God gave me that ability to say I don't believe in him. And I can say, okay, whatever, that was a part of me that, like, it's separate from me. It's not the real me, it's not the divine part in me. The problem that I'm struggling with is that it makes me feel worse, in the sense of, I'm supposed to be told that this is all close to me. I'm supposed to be told I can be, capable of returning and repenting. And it almost feels like, well, okay, this is separate from me now. How am I supposed to take the power of my speech? And when I now compare it to, quote unquote, the speech of God, I'm even more removed, not closer. You hear what I'm saying?
No, I'm not trying to understand. I understood the beginning. I'm trying to understand what's the part that makes you feel bad here.
That I'm separated. I'm not even, one.
Why are you I would think the opposite. It shows me that I'm actually never separated. When I choose to do something wrong, I'm never outside of God, not even for a second. And even the wrong that I choose is something it's a choice within God's world. Now, this leads us to the next question, which is then what's the difference between good and bad? If all of it is God's world and all of it's an expression of God, then when I choose something bad, it's not any worse than choosing something good, because all of it's God. And to that, we didn't discuss the Tzimtzum part, but that's where the Tanya explains that everything was created by God and everything's an expression of God, but there are things that God gives life to from an internal place because that's what he wants. And there are things that God created as the road not to take, so to speak. Meaning the evil and the negativity that exists in this world, God creates it because he needs to create that other side in order for there to be a balance and to have choice. But he doesn't create it for itself. He creates it as a means to us having choice. It's like, think of a parent their child is screaming and crying, and the parent is trying to get the child to calm down and be quiet because the parent really wants to teach a child just how to behave properly. And the parent sits and the parent is trying to get the child, whatever they can, to get the child to calm down. Now, scenario 2 would be also a parent with a screaming, crying child, but this parent doesn't really care about the child being a mensch. Whatever, they don't care. Let the kid cry. But this parent is trying to watch something, and the kid screaming and crying is disturbing them. So this parent wants the child to be quiet, not because, they really care for the child to learn how to be quiet, but honestly, the child just being annoying and getting in their way. In both cases, the parent is trying to get the child to be quiet. In the first case, the parent actually cares for the child to be quiet. In the second case, it's just a means to an end for the parent to get what they actually want. I'm comparing this to God creating good and evil in the world, or holy and unholy. God created you as a holy person, and he created Torah and mitzvahs as holy entities because he wants us to connect through his Torah. But in order for us to be able to choose to connect through his Torah, he also had to create the evil stuff that he doesn't want us to do. So those things, he doesn't power them because he cares about the negativity and the evil and he wants it to exist. He only needs it to exist so that we have the ability to choose him and choose holiness. So while it's still an expression of him, it's a very almost diluted expression of him. It's a very indirect expression of him. And when I choose to do what God wants, I'm choosing his essence. I'm choosing the innermost him instead of choosing that road that he created that he doesn't want me to take. I don't know if this answers your question, Sarah.
Not directly, but it's okay.
Okay, no, so then maybe you want to repeat your question.
No, it's okay. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
There's also, you may be familiar with the expression, Imo Anochi Betsara. God says, I am with you in your pain, in your difficult time. Say, what do you mean? Okay, God, like, if you don't want me to have a difficult time, don't put me in a difficult, what do you mean? You're giving me a difficult time and then you're with me in the difficult time. Obviously, there's different ways to understand this, but one way to understand this is a person going through a difficult time, for whatever reason, God's calculations, God needs them to go through a difficult time. God says, don't worry, even your difficult time, it's actually me. It's all me. It always was me. And there's a certain comfort in that, knowing that even when I am at the lowest of low, when I'm going through a difficult time, whether through my own choices or through things that are happening to me, even in the lowest, darkest place, there's no place that's outside of God. There's a
Right.
there's a Hasidic melody to the words. The words of it are Achen ata kel mistater, which translates roughly as, oh yes, it's you, God, who are hiding. This song, which really has the connotation of, oh my goodness, in the darkness, like, oh my God, you're really hiding from me. The melody is actually a very lively melody. The song is sung like in a very joyous way. It's sung, oh, hey, nata, ata, kel mistater. Oh, yes, it's you. God, you're hiding. Oh, yes, God, you are hiding again. And you're like, what's joyous about it? It's joyous because when you start seeing the world through this perspective, when I experience darkness and difficulty, instead of thinking, oh, God forgot about me, like I became far from God, I'm removed, God's not with me, it's like, oh yes, I remember. Everything is God, and even the darkness he creates, he's just so well hidden in the darkness that I can't see him, but I am going to sing and remind myself that this too is godliness. That even this hidden difficulty, difficult experience that I'm having, this too is God, even if I don't understand how it is God. Now, the important piece we didn't speak about yet, which is a whole second half of this chapter, is the concept of Tzimtzum. I know many people here are familiar with it. Some people have studied it more, some people have studied it less. The word Tzimtzum literally means contraction. And the idea is that we're trying to understand, okay, if everything is really God, how can I say that a Torah scroll, a holy person, and I don't know, a pack of drugs and murder are all God? Like, it's the same God. How could the same God, how could, at least when I speak, if I say that speech is an expression of me, if you read people's speeches from different times in their life, you'll get to know them. You'll kind of find a running theme. It's actually interesting because now with AI, it's pretty crazy. But you can ask like Chat GPT to say, let's say there is a celebrity who gives a lot of speeches on YouTube. You can ask Chat GPT, can you please write me a speech in the style of celebrity X about, I don't know, fill in the blank. And ChatGPT will create a speech for you that if you're familiar with that person's style, you read the speech, you'll be like, oh my goodness, I could so imagine this person giving the speech, because I mean, we're a person when they speak, even though I speak at different times in my life and different times in my day, ultimately you get to know a person through their speech because it's all expressing the same person. If I'm trying to understand God through his speech or his creations, oh well, let's figure this God out. I mean, he created holy and he created unholy. He created great people and he created evil people. He created, Torah and he created terror. Like, who is this God? Like, which one is truly expressing God? And the answer to that, the Tanya explains in this chapter, is Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is contraction, meaning that the same God is expressing himself. Some things he's expressing more directly, and some things become more contracted. So a great example I heard for this is, let's say I need to give a class I'm told I want to give a class on the topic of Hanukkah. All right, who's my audience? Well, a bunch of, educated Jewish women. Great. I'll prepare a speech on the topic of Hanukkah. And then they tell me, well, actually, never mind. It's it's a bunch of Jewish adults who don't really know much about Judaism. Okay, fine, we'll tweak it. Well, actually, never mind. It's high school kids. It's not even adults. Okay, we'll tweak it again. Never mind. It's actually elementary school kids. You know, at the end, it's like, no, you're actually giving a class to toddlers. You have to teach about Hanukkah to toddlers. You know, they say you have to have tremendous respect for preschool teachers. Some people look down at a preschool teacher like, oh, you're just teaching 2-year-olds. But the truth is to take big ideas and express it in a way that a young child will understand takes tremendous talent. You know, it's much easier to preach to a bunch of, brilliant people. The hardest part of giving a good speech is figuring out what parts you're eliminating. I think there's an expression from Rabbi Gordon, who's a great Tanya teacher. He says, when a brilliant professor gives a speech, if everyone walks out saying, "Oh gosh, he's a brilliant professor," and I understand none of it, then it wasn't a good class, right? The professor was very brilliant, expressed their brilliance, but ultimately nobody understood anything. You want that at the end of a class, people come out saying, "Wow, I really learned something." So the same, going back to the teaching about Hanukkah, I could teach a lot of the same concepts, but I'm going to teach them very differently to different audiences, depending on their knowledge, depending on their intellectual capacity. So the class that I will give to a bunch of intellectual adults is going to be less Tzimtzum, less diluted, less contracted, so to speak. The same class given to young children, I'm going to have to contract the ideas even more. I could say simplify them, but it's not really simplify them, because a really good teacher is not simplifying. They're kind of packaging it in more simplistic terms, but there's still a lot of depth in it. And obviously, if I'm trying to teach it to preschoolers, then the Tzimtzum is even greater. So the parallel to that, if all of the world is God's expression, different elements in creation have gone through or go through different levels of Tzimtzum. God's expression, as expressed in a Torah scroll or in a holy object or in a God-fearing Jewish person, goes through less contraction. God's expression as it appears in a stone or just something inanimate goes through a lot more contraction. God's expression as it appears in something that is evil and antithetical to godliness, now that's really brilliant. To be able to express yourself in a way that the idea you're expressing not only doesn't feel connected to you, but feels like it's so independent that it can go against you, that's something only God can create. But ultimately, all of it is God's expression going through different gradations of Tzimtzum. I think we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to stop here and let's discuss or ask. Yes, Harriet, go ahead.
So I think where I'm struggling is in terms of our expression. And I was thinking about your good morning and other things. And what makes all of the ways that we speak, how do we know that it's not all part of our imagination? Whether it's good morning as we're trying to connect with someone, or prayers of trying to connect with God.
What do you mean it's not our imagination? If other people around us hear it, then clearly we've expressed it to others.
But is that, but if it's our imagination, then we imagine that the other people are hearing it.
Okay, so that's an important thing you bring up. Remember, we said there's two different perspectives. From God's perspective, I wouldn't even say it's his imagination, but his relationship to the created beings is the same as my relationship to my imagination. But God's imagination is actually real created beings. We're not saying that we don't exist. We actually, there's an age-old philosophical Jewish discussion is, do we exist or do we not exist? Like, are we all just a figment of God's imagination? And the conclusion is, no, of course we exist. We actually truly exist. And our free choice is real free choice. It's not an illusion of free choice. It truly is free choice. From God's perspective, however, God's relationship to us is similar to what our relationship is to our imagination. Just like my imagination is just an internal expression of me, the whole world and all of creation to God is just an internal expression of him. But in God's case, because he's God, his internal expression is so much more intricate, detailed, complex, and realistic, and real, actually. See, we could go back and say, what defines reality? What makes something real versus not real? God creates what reality is too. So the conclusion is not, all right, just go back to sleep because it's all imagination anyway. The conclusion is, no, we're very real people living very real lives. But let's remember that there's someone on the other side of the glass. And all of these experiences that I'm having that I think are just coincidence, just chance, just a lot of good human effort, just brilliance, just good luck, or whatever it is. Actually, no, it's actually all God.
So how do we arouse that spark within us to connect more strongly with God?
Okay, so, well, for starters, let's go back to the Shema. We said Shema is such a central prayer in Judaism, and we started with a question last time. Why is it such a big deal to say, the Lord our God, the Lord is one? Okay, how many people do we know worship idols? But no, we actually notice in Shema, we cover our eyes because we want to take a moment to stop looking at the world around us. It reminds us that actually everything that I see is just one perspective. It's not the true reality. And we cover our eyes and we say, this is the truth. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Actually, everything around me is godliness. And everything is God. And everything that I'm seeing with my eyes is just my human perspective. And that's why Shema is such a powerful prayer. It kind of recenters us and refocuses us on remembering that it's not just I'm a physical being trying to connect to something spiritual. Actually, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience because this is what God, is doing to me. All of creation is truly him. To see oneness in creation, to experience his oneness, to see the world from his perspective, I need to close my eyes and I need to use what they say, my mind's eye, my chachma, my wisdom, my knowledge. Only in that way I can connect to his perspective and start seeing the world from his perspective.
Thanks, sweetie.
Rabbi Zinkler, I was listening to a podcast and he said we should move our head because God is everywhere, north, south, east, west, up, down. And that he was saying when we get to that point that, and I've been doing it, and it kind of shifts.
So I'll add
exactly
to that.
what you're talking about.
So I'll add to that. The word echad in Shema, we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem echad. Echad means one. The letters that spell echad are aleph, chet, and dalid. Aleph is one, right? Numerical equivalent to one. Chet is numerical equivalent to 8, which is 7 heavens and 1 earth. We say it is one God expressed in all 7 heavens and the earth. And then the Dalid is 4, which refers to the 4 directions. So Shema is a meditation. We're supposed to be covering our eyes and focusing on this. So yeah, I see a lot of people doing it, not necessarily are they thinking, oh, let me move my head in all directions, but if they're actually thinking like God is one and thinking, you know, all four directions, it's almost like they just naturally end up moving their head around because they're trying to, you know, meditate on this idea that God is everywhere. You know, when we start doing this meditation in this way, when we say the Shema really as a meditation on a regular basis, it starts allowing us to look at life in a different way. Because I stopped thinking of, you know, life is, well, there's what God wants, and then there are the obstacles that stop me, and then there's what I truly hope for, and then there's the issues that I come across. Say, no, everything is God. It's all one. This whole world is one reality, and that reality is Hashem. And if you remember, we had that quote last class where someone said, you know, you all are atheists to all the other gods, and a real atheist just takes it one more step, you know, just believes in one less God than you. That's really not what it is. When you understand it in this way, we have a different view of reality. It's not that, oh, we believe in one God and some people believe in two gods. So we believe that everything truly is God. And this is a great story I have to say before we close. Some of you may have heard this one. They say there's a guy meets his future son-in-law for the first time, and his son-in-law is a very pious yeshiva student. He spent his entire life studying Torah. So the guy goes to meet him and he says, oh, it's so nice to meet you. It's so nice that you're marrying my daughter, but tell me a little bit about like what your plans are for life. I mean, you spent your whole life studying Torah. How do you plan to make a living? He's like, well, don't worry. God will help. He's like, okay, fine. But like, let's be practical. Like, how are you going to pay the rent? Like, you guys are going to get a house to live in? How are you going to pay the rent? He's like, don't worry. God is going to help. He says, okay, but what about like food and clothes? I mean, basics. Don't worry. God will take care of everything. The guy comes back home. He tells his wife, I love this new son-in-law. He already called me God 3 times in one conversation. Most of us will say that, of course, I don't believe in other gods. Of course, I believe in one God. But the truth is, when we think about it, we often attribute power to other things. You know, we may not call it God, but it's like, you know, there's God, and then there's how the stock market does. And there's God, and then, you know, a good day or a bad day in the business. And then there's God, but my annoying boss who, you know, decided to fire me. So we may not be consciously thinking of it as God and other powers, but when we say the Shema, it's a daily reminder, and we're commanded to say Shema twice a day. It's a daily reminder to kind of refocus and say, no, there is only one God, and God's in charge of everything. Yes, we don't always understand his ways. Sometimes his ways are very painful. Sometimes they're very difficult. Sometimes they're very dark, but all of it is one God, and there is no other power outside of him. And we can kind of circle back to when we said that the first 2 commandments include all of the Torah. That's really what it boils down to, because ultimately, fulfilling God's will, every time I fulfill God's will, I'm affirming that he's the one God, that I recognize God. Every time I say, yeah, I know God wants me to do this, but actually this week is too busy for me. Basically what I'm saying is there's God, and then there's another power called my calendar, you know? So when we start looking at the world in this way and realizing that everything is God, it changes our perspective, and it definitely allows us to connect to God on a deeper level. Next chapter, we're going to talk about, you know, more specifically about those that, okay, it's fine. I get it that I recognize that everything really is God, but what about those things and those people that seem to go against God? Like, that's already taking it too far. And of course, later we're going to kind of go back to the conversation. How does this meditation and how do these thoughts help me awaken that innate natural love that I have for God and allow me to utilize them in everyday life, not just in severe circumstances? yes, anyone who has to go, have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week. And anyone who wants to stay on to discuss or ask questions, you're more than welcome to. Yes, Lorraine.
So the thing that I love about the concept of echad is that it connects all of us as echad. There's one of us. And so I remember when I was in my 20s and just getting into spirituality as a practice. And one of the people that I was listening to at the time said, imagine how you would drive your car if every police officer along the path was an angel put there to make sure you didn't have a crash. And so it was really important that you followed exactly the speed limit because they were all just lining your path, blessing you and making sure you got there safely. Then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I would never speed again. That would, like, the answers from the audience were like,
Yeah.
I would never speed again. Well, what if you realize that that nasty coworker is just a sad, there's something sad that you and only you can change for her. Like, what would you do then? Like, you would never, say B word, get out of my, like in your brain, you would never curse her out. You would be like, oh my God, I get to do a mitzvah. I get to be kind and loving to the office. You know, there's always one of those B
Right.
words in every office. So you know what I'm talking about. But you go through what this person did was they went through every single area of life. What if it was God? And that's that song, What If God Was One of Us, or there's a lot of those that are out there and very popular. And it's the idea that if this is all God, then we are all deeply connected. And what is happening in Israel is intimately impacting our hearts and the way we feel and the way we walk in the world. And what is happening, and you could do that for everywhere. I was just picking Israel because we're all Jewish, but you could do that with everywhere. If we're truly all one, then we're truly all connected and impacting each other.
100%. I thank you for sharing that. I once heard it described as, when you drive down the street and you see like, oh, cool, the traffic light just went on. And then I walk into my house and the washing machine is working. And then I go to the office and my computer's working. And it's like all these like independent entities when I look at the world at this level. What if, when you okay, my kids have these like electronic gadgets that then they always at some point in the game they get bored of playing with it the right way and they like to take it apart and they look inside and suddenly you see all the wires and you see the little computer chip and all that stuff. Like, what if we look down into the ground and we had this x-ray vision and we started seeing all of those wires and cables that are actually connecting, that really my washing machine and the street light and the computers in my office and all of these things are actually really connected underground. And not just these things are connected, but things all over my city and all over the world. They're all really, there's this like underground connection that exists that we don't really see because we're just looking at things from the outside. So, similar to that, yes, everything is truly one and everything is connected. Us and the people in Israel, I think, is an even deeper connection because it says all Jews are kind of share one soul. So it's literally like family, the same way that you feel for your family, no matter where they are in the world. But yeah, there is a oneness that pervades everything, and we don't see it, which is why we need to study it and learn about it. But the truth is that when in the times of the future redemption, what if there's always this discussion. People are like, well, what's going to happen? The future redemption, is the world just going to be weird? Is it going to be, like this movie, like that movie? Like, what's going to happen? One of the answers that's given is the Hebrew word for exile and redemption is actually almost identical. The Hebrew word for exile is gola, and the Hebrew word for redemption is geula. The only thing that's different between them is the geula has an aleph, an extra aleph. And the explanation that's given is, in the times of the redemption, life will be the same. Don't worry. You'll have a good, normal life. But the oneness, the aleph, the one that connects everything is going to be revealed. And we're going to see all of these things that now we have to learn about and study about is going to be evident to everybody. So, yes, understanding that oneness and seeing those connections, understanding them, it changes the way we go about our lives. But, if we're real humans, we encounter a lot of things that make us forget and make it hard to think about this, which I think why it's not for no reason that the Torah tells us we have to say Shema twice a day, and for those who actually pray all 3 daily prayers, we actually have the opportunity to say Shema more than just twice a day, but at minimum twice a day, in the morning prayers and before we go to sleep at night, we take a moment to meditate and to cover our eyes and say, actually, all of reality is not what it appears to be. It's really all God. My favorite, this whole week I've been thinking about this. I was walking outside, now with the weather this week, and somehow the trees, everything looks so much more majestic in this cloudy, ominous weather. I'm wow, it's all God. This is all expressions of godliness. I don't know, I see, those people who connect to God through nature, I can see that sometimes. It's when you start looking at those things that are just wow you and you recognize this is God too. It just, I don't know, for me, it helps, it changes my perspective. I need reminders throughout my day, but it's definitely a very powerful meditation, a very powerful thought process. Any more thoughts, questions?
That was wonderful, Dini. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn. Sorry we couldn't see you, but I'm glad you're here.
I'm feeling better. Thank you.
All right, take care. Have a wonderful week, everybody. We'll see you next
It was
week.
a very, I think, a very complex idea to get across.
Deep philosophy, right?
A lot of, a lot of thinking.
So do me a favor this week when you take your daily walk, when you go outside, take a moment, try to meditate on this concept and see what it does to you. See how it affects.
Well, I could see just a little bit of thinking that I was doing. I think it causes your ego to come down a little bit, very much realizing that you're a cog in a big wheel or whatever, it's just, I don't know. It just,
they say a story about a chassid. I don't remember his name. He was a businessman. I believe he was a student of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. And they say when he used to do his monthly calculations, he had a notebook and he would write down all of his expenses and all of his income and, he did all of his math. Then at the bottom, he would draw a line, where you had to write the sum total. And for the sum total, he would write the Hebrew words, Ein od milvado. There is only one God. Basically, all the numbers, but somehow the conclusion is always, there's just one God.
Yeah. Thanks, Dini.
All right, take care, everybody.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Night, everybody.
Thank you so much.